this is Aussie Woodshed. My name's Luke, and in today's video we're going to be looking at smoothing and finishing tools. So when it comes to smoothing and finishing tools, there is a whole bunch of different tools, but not as many as you would really think. So these are tools that after you've done your rough tools and you've sort of done your mid tools, it's the final tools that you want to do the final finishes on. Take all the tool marks out before a finish. So let's jump in and have a look at what I've got here. So first cab off the rank, files. Now this is one of the go-to tools that I think about when I'm shaping wood to actually finish off. Sometimes you can follow up with other tools after this, but you can get a pretty fine finish with a fine bastard file like this, which is a single cut file. It leaves a very smooth finish, so you could use a rasp and then use this after it, and you probably wouldn't even need to finish further after that, because this leaves a very, very fine finish, especially if you draw file with it, which is generally reserved for metal, but draw filing, pulling across the side, you can get a very fine finish even on timber, and I've done it a few times, and it works just as well as it does on metal. And then the one that I'm not so sure a lot of people think about, but it is definitely the tool that finishes timber more for me than any of these other tools most of the time, and that is the humble smoothing plane. Now, whether it's a bevel down one or a bevel up like this, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's nice and sharp, that's what really counts. And generally on the finest setting you can find. Those gossamer shavings, I suppose, is what I've seen Christopher Schwartz talk about. That's that finest shaving, that fraction of a millimeter that just takes that glass finish off, or leaves that glass finish behind, so it can take your finish. And in some cases, you might, after you get that, have to actually sand it to take up certain finishes, and that's a whole other thing that we're not even going to be talking about today. But the hand plane, very, very fine set smoother. And then probably the tool that most of you think about as a finishing tool, scrapers. Most common, probably the humble card scraper, just a piece of punched square steel with a hook rolled on it, curve shapes, and whether you buy them yourself or make them, you can make all sorts of shapes to actually have these help you out to finish your work, even on very intricate shapes. If you're doing flat surfaces, then the cabinet scraper or the scraper plane might be better suited, because this is held at the angle that you require. You can do very fine work or also thicker work or heavier work with this, so you can take quite thick shavings with this one. However, it does mean that you're not going to burn your hands, and you have a little bit of a reference for flat, although the cabinet scraper, obviously used for the tops of cabinets, that's where its name came from, it does a very good job at sort of dealing with spot tear out that might have been left from a smoothing plane. If you need a little more reference of flat and a little more attention in how thick your shaving is, then the adjustable scraper plane might be more suited for the role. And then special mention, sandpaper. If I didn't mention sandpaper here, I'd hear about it in the comments, I know. So sandpaper is probably the most commonly used finishing application that people use, especially power tool users, but also hand tool users as well. It's obviously available in a whole bunch of different grits. This one happens to be 240 grit, and I know when you're at those really low numbers of 40, 80, it could be considered roughing, but in my mind it's not a roughing tool, because you're not likely to use those grits to fit joinery or rough a shape out, although I'm not. Maybe some of you do, and you'll have to let me know down below whether that's the case. But to be honest, the way I see sandpaper is you run through the grits after you finish your project, getting it ready to finish and smoothing it all out, taking all the rough bits out. And that's where finishing sits. So, sandpaper. So there you have it, folks. That's enough from me on finishing and smoothing tools. These are what I collectively use to finish every single project that I make. And I'm sure a lot of you would find great use in a lot of these tools, and I'm sure a lot of you do use a lot of these tools. So what I'd love to hear from you is what tools you use for finishing and smoothing out your final projects before you finish. Do leave what regions and some costs and brands if you can. If not, just leave some general ideas to help everybody out. And if you'd like to see the video that spurred this series, do check out the Traveler's Toolkit here. Bye for now.